I was 13 years old at the time, and I thought I was far too old to play hide and seek. But I wasn't going to say that since I had just been happy to be included. At the moment, there were four of us sitting in the attic. It was a room that was accessible by walking up a narrow flight of old wooden stairs at the north end of the Victorian house we currently occupied. It was my first time in this room, as it had been previously full of junk, and I had been tossing out old boxes in an attempt to clean up the space. It was Kyle's house, or rather it belonged to Kyle's parents, and he sat across from me on the threadbare rug that covered a portion of the attic floor. His little sister, Adelaide, was there, looking excited as well for being included in the games of the older kids. And there was Sarah, who was Kyle's girlfriend. I would be lying if I said that I didn't have a crush on Kyle. I had one on him ever since I was 3 years old and we moved next door. Our parents had become good friends, and almost every weekend they were at each other's house, playing poker in the living room or grilling in the backyard while wearing garnished Hawaiian shirts. We had been friends as well, but he had grown up while I had just grown outwards. I was a fat teenager, and no amount of denial would be enough to consume my extra mass. The constant taunts of my peers also made sure that I wouldn't forget it. My thick glasses and poor choices in wardrobe didn't help me either. My extra bulk had made the attic hot and more unbearable, as I was sweating freely while the others looked like they were enjoying the temperature. I'm not sure that I want to play hide and seek. That's kind of a game for babies, Sarah said with a pout as she flipped her long blonde hair beside her shoulder. She was beautiful, which just made me more self-conscious. I took off my glasses to wipe my face of its excess sweat. The room was a blur till I put them back on, and I saw Sarah giving me a small scowl as everything snapped back into focus. I looked away as I felt myself blush from the scrutiny. Adelaide looked crestfallen. She was only 10 years old, and it seemed like she had been looking forward to it. She looked at her brother. "If you guys don't want to play hide and seek, do you want to play a board game instead?" The little girl sounded hopeful, and I saw that the attic was stacked with quite a few board games. Monopoly could be fun, at least I was good at that. "Nah, we don't have to play board games all the time. Let's do something different." He grinned at each of us in turn. "Let's play truth or dare." Mentally, I shuddered. I wasn't good at that game at all. I was usually dared to do something that would just embarrass me. And like the last time when they dared me to run a mile, I hadn't been able to finish and they all laughed at me while I sat panting in the dirt. Everyone except Adelaide, who had been kind enough to give me a glass of water. Sarah got a vicious grin on her face, and I knew that she liked the idea. Adelaide looked at me and scrunched her face in distaste. "I don't like that game. Last time Kyle and Sarah dared me to eat a bug." Kyle let out a sharp laugh, and I glared at him as best I could. Adelaide was scared of bugs, and making her eat one had been a mean thing to do. Kyle stared back at me apologetically and smiled wickedly. I felt myself blush against my will. He was really cute, even if he was a jerk sometimes. Sarah walked over to me and gave me a playful shove. "Come on, it'll be fun. We can make a rule that we won't dare each other to eat or drink anything gross." That seemed to placate Adelaide, and she gave a shrug. "As long as you promise." Sarah made a cross sign over her heart and smiled. "I cross my heart and I hope to die. We won't make anyone eat or drink anything gross." "Then I'm okay to play," Adelaide said with finality. I didn't say anything. I usually just went along with whatever everyone else wanted to do. Kyle clapped his hands together. "Then it's settled. I'll go first, and we'll just go around in a circle." He looked at me and pointed. "We'll start with you, Lily. Truth or dare." He crossed his arms and he stared me down. I weighed my options. If I said truth, it'd ask me something embarrassing, but if I said dare, then I'd have to do something embarrassing. "Dare," I said, and then braced myself for what he had planned. Kyle raised an eyebrow in surprise. He must have expected me to answer with truth and not dare. "I dare you to do the splits," he smirked. I shrugged and sat down. This wasn't as bad as what it could have been. At least I didn't have to run anywhere this time. For the next full minute, everyone laughed as I attempted to do the splits. I wasn't very flexible and I couldn't do the full splits like he had wanted. I thought that my poor jeans would tear, and finally I managed to do a half-decent split and I was able to get off the floor. Next, it was my turn to ask Sarah the same question. Sarah, do you want truth or dare? Sarah rolled her eyes and said, truth. She crossed her arms and waited for me to ask my question. Do you want to kiss anyone in this room? I asked half-heartedly. It was a lame question, but I didn't know what else to ask. Sarah rolled her eyes again and then fixed me with that vicious grin again. Oh, I've been dying to plant a big sloppy kiss on your beautiful face, Lily. She pursed her lips and made an exaggerated kissing face at me. Everyone laughed and I tried to laugh along, but I couldn't force myself to. It seemed like it would be another game where I would just get picked on. My turn, Adelaide said excitedly. Her enthusiasm was cute. Even Sarah seemed to think so as she gave the little girl a small smile. Do you want truth or dare? Sarah asked, crossing her arms again and looking serious. Adelaide was jumping up and down with her excitement. I want dare, Adelaide said with a giggle. Sarah thought for a moment and then shrugged. I dare you to spin in a circle really fast. That's easy, the little girl exclaimed. She lifted her arms above her head and with what looked like a ballerina pose and spun as fast as she could. She managed 3 fast spins before the vertigo got to her and she fell to the side. She giggled again, not fazed at all by the fall. That wasn't so bad. Now I get to ask Kyle the question. She pointed at her brother and asked dramatically, truth or dare? Kyle had an air of indifference as he answered, I'll take a dare. Then I dare you to do a backflip, Adelaide said with a flourish. Kyle proceeded to do just that. He jumped up on an old chest and then executed a perfect backflip that sent a loud thud, reverberating through the old floorboards. I was certain that one of our parents were here down on the first floor, but it must have been muffled as no one came to check on us. It was my turn again, and Kyle turned to face me. Brushing the dust from his face that had flown after being disturbed by his backflip. Okay, Lily, truth or dare? He fixed me with his intense stare again. I looked up at the attic roof just to break contact and pretended to be deep in thought. I'll do dare again, I said finally. The last one hadn't been so bad, so I felt comfortable with asking for it again. Kyle smirked and pointed to the chest in front of him, the same one that he had backflipped off of. I dare you to stay in the trunk for 5 minutes. I looked at the chest fearfully. It looked like it would be big enough for me, but the thought of being locked in the trunk for any length of time sent me into a cold sweat. I didn't do well in closed or tiny spaces, and even crowded elevators could be a challenge for me. Kyle sighed. Are you going to go through with this dare or not? I had been backing away unconsciously since he had first dared me. I had the chest warily. How long am I supposed to stay in that chest? I was trying to sound brave. Kyle glanced quickly at Sarah as she gave a tiny grin. Sarah answered for him. I think 5 minutes should be long enough. I still hesitated. 5 minutes was not long, but it was already so hot in the attic and it would be even hotter in that chest. Could I back out on the dare? And no backing out, Kyle said as if he had been reading my mind. He flipped open the lid of the chest and it was mostly empty. The bottom was filled with some kind of old white cloth. Kyle lifted it up and I saw it was an antique wedding dress. It was far too old to have been used in this century, but I could tell it had been beautiful at one point. I wondered who had so carelessly left something like that in an old chest. That's so weird, Kyle said while tossing it back into the chest. We'll leave it in there so there's something soft to lay on. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Just the thought of getting into the chest was making my heart race. I started taking deep breaths to calm my nerves, and it helped a little. Sarah let out a snort, and I looked over at her. She gave me such a look of disdain that I was taken aback. We all know that you can't do it, Lily. You're too fat to get in that chest. She unfolded her arms and continued to glare at me. as if she was somehow offended with my very presence. Instead of making me slink away, I felt myself getting angry. What have I ever done to her? She was always so mean to everybody, and only Kyle seemed to be spared her crazy moods. I'm getting in a chest. I just wanted to catch my breath, that's all, I said with as much defiance as I could muster. Sarah scoffed and folded her arms again. I'll believe you when I see you get in that box. She smirked at me, still not believing me. After a few more breaths, I marched over to the chest. Kyle grinned and held the lid all the way open so I could get inside. Kicking off my shoes, I stepped into the confines of the box and felt the old silk of the wedding dress against my bare feet. It was oddly comforting, and I lowered myself the rest of the way down. There was just enough room for me to curl up on my side. As I did, I got a full face of old, dusty silk, and I sneezed. "Bless you," Adelaide said from somewhere out of my field of vision. I turned my head to say thanks when suddenly the lid slammed shut and it went dark. The dust from the lid off the chest came loose and I started coughing. I could hear Sarah and Kyle talking softly and giggling beyond the chest, and then there was silence. I shifted a bit to get as comfortable as possible, and I closed my eyes. There was nothing to see anyways. I was struck with how quiet it was. I swear I could hear dust settling in the box and on my bare skin. It was getting hotter with each breath I took, so I took tiny, short, measured breaths. I tried not to think about the heat. At least any discomfort I felt would only be temporary. With each inhale, I could smell the mold of the dress beneath me. It was nauseating, and I started to breathe through my mouth. This didn't help either, as I could taste it instead. It left a lingering taste on my tongue that probably wouldn't go away without large amounts of toothpaste. Time passed, and I tried counting off the seconds in my mind. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. I kept counting until I was certain that enough time had passed. But still, I couldn't hear any moving outside the chest. I waited a few more seconds before I reached up and gently banged on the lid. "Guys?" I knocked again, even louder. Maybe they were just talking and couldn't hear me, or maybe my knocks weren't loud enough. I hit the lid harder, hard enough that it made the dusty air swirl and cling to my sweaty face. "Guys, let me out, it's been long enough." But still, all I heard was silence. My heart started pounding as the barest hints of panic started to creep in. I was done with this. They had had their fun and I was done playing this game. They could play on their own, but I was hot and sweaty and whatever enjoyment I had been having already left. I shifted so that I was laying on my back and I placed both my hands on the lift and I shoved as hard as I could, already anticipating the slightly cool air of the attic. The lid did not budge. I pushed again, straining for longer this time until my arms started to shake. This time I panicked and it was instantaneous and the rush of the adrenaline almost made me faint. I pushed with as much strength as I had and still the lid refused to budge. Even with my back against the bottom of the chest, I didn't have enough leverage. I banged on the lid again. "Let me out! Let me out!" I screamed then. My voice was oddly muffled in the dark of that chest, but surely someone should have heard me. The reality of the situation had hit me. They had locked me in this chest. They meant to keep me in this chest until the cruel sense of humor was satisfied. I might end up in here forever. With another burst of energy, I thrashed around the box, getting my legs tangled in the dress, and I felt a prick of pain as I brushed my toe against the wood. The chest rocked back and forth, but I could still not get free. I started to cry. I was sobbing, actually. My heart was pounding, and my feeble attempts to free myself were worthless. It was getting hotter inside that tiny space, and it felt like I was breathing hot steam. How long could I actually stay in here? What if they were outside right now, listening and laughing to themselves as I panicked and begged? Maybe that's what they wanted, to hear the fear in my voice. Perhaps that would satisfy them, and then they'd finally let me out. "Okay, you got me. I'm really scared. Please, I just want to get out. You've won, okay? I'm really scared." I started sobbing again. My tears mixed with the sweat, and my eyes were stinging. There was still silence beyond the darkness, though. I couldn't hear any giggling or any footsteps. For all I know, they had left me completely alone. Please, I just want to go home. I sobbed again and I felt the tears roll off of my cheeks. At that moment, I became aware of some tiny prickling along my skin. I hadn't noticed it at first in my first frantic attempts to free myself, but I soon realized what it was. It was the tiny scurrying of bugs along my skin. My thrashing around must have disturbed a deep nest that had been happily living in the old dress. My heart hammered a deep staccato beat as a new burst of fear hit me. I screamed again, louder this time. I hate bugs of any kind, and I almost have to get my dad or my mom to squish them when I find them in my room, but there was no escaping them now. They were intimately close. Their legs tentatively scampered along my naked arms and my neck. Finding that I was no threat, they crawled over my face without fear. They made a new home in the tangles of my hair, and I could feel them touching my lips. Clamping my mouth shut, I could still feel their tiny antennas running along my trembling lips. Oh God, this is too much. I prayed, and in my mind I was screaming. But I was too afraid to open my mouth now as I thought the bugs would try to find their way inside of my body. The heat was pulsating and all-encompassing. It was like being locked inside of a sauna, and I felt myself getting dizzy. I was getting nauseous too. Bile was rising in my throat as my body started to give in to the heat and the stress. I couldn't help myself. I vomited as it felt like acid leaving my stomach, and there was no place for it to go. I started a choking cough, and I vomited more as I kept panicking and I thrashed around. I managed to roll onto my side and the vomit dripped away. The bugs on my face scampered away from the noxious stuff, and even with my eyes closed, I knew I was close to passing out. When I did, I wasn't sure that I would wake back up. Slamming my head against the side of the chest one more time, I whimpered, and I felt myself lose consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, I was drowning. My vision was swimming in and out of focus, and my ears felt like they were stuffed with cotton. I could hear voices, but I had no idea who was talking. I didn't know who I was or where I was, and then the water hit my face again and my vision sharpened, bringing into focus my father's face as he screamed into my face. "Lily, Lily, can you hear me?" He screamed as he poured another glass of water over my face. I opened my mouth and water rushed in, leaving me sputtering. I stared up at him, still not quite comprehending what had actually happened. All I could manage was a tiny wheeze of acknowledgement. I could feel cold linoleum underneath my head, and it felt like heaven. In my heat-addled brain, I realized that I must be in the kitchen downstairs, but I had no idea how I got out of that chest. "She's alive!" My father screeched as I could see tears in his eyes. He lifted me off the floor, which was no small feat, and began to carry me out of the house. I could hear an ambulance siren off in the distance getting closer, and someone must have called it. My head lowered to the side, and I looked behind us. I saw Kyle, Sarah, and Adelaide. As my vision focused again, I could see that Adelaide was hysterical. She was clinging to her mother, and her little body was shaking with the strength of her sobs. Her face was bright red, and her eyes were squeezed shut and leaking tears. Sarah and Kyle, however, looked pissed and perhaps a little scared. I tried to say something to them, but before I could, I was placed inside of the ambulance. The next few days, I stayed in the hospital bed, hooked up to an IV as they pumped fluids back into my body. I was treated for hypothermia. The same thing happens to kids who have been locked in cars on a hot day. The doctor said that I was very lucky to be alive, and I still wasn't sure how long I had been locked in that box, but I would have not lasted much longer. If the heat hadn't killed me, I could have choked to death on my own vomit. I got better eventually, but for many days after that, I felt weak. When I got home, my parents had told me how they found me. They had been oddly quiet about the whole incident. It was like they were afraid to bring it up until they were sure I was strong enough. After locking me in that chest, Kyle and Sarah had dragged Adelaide downstairs and told her that they intended to leave me in there for a lot longer than 5 minutes. Sarah had said she wanted to see how long it would take for anyone to notice that I was missing. Adelaide had immediately disagreed, but they refused to let her go back up in the attic. As soon as she could, she snuck away and ran to the upstairs. She was the one who had unlocked the chest, and her screams had brought my parents up to that hellish room. Apparently, she had thought I was dead when she first found me. Kyle and Sarah denied everything, though, and Sarah adamantly claimed that she and Kyle hadn't seen me all day. Kyle shook his head and said that I probably locked myself in the chest to get some attention or to get him in trouble. Kyle's parents believed him, despite Adelaide also backing up my story, and we were convinced that it had been on my own stupidity that I had gotten trapped in that old box. They even demanded that we pay for the old wedding dress that I had destroyed. My parents, however, believed me, and that was the end of the friendship between our families. We moved away not long afterwards to get a fresh start in a new town where kids didn't whisper about me behind my back, and where Kyle and Sarah didn't spread rumors that I was an attention-seeking psycho. Ever since that incident, I hated the heat. It would send me into terrible panic attacks. I had to sleep with the light on for years, and at night, I would frequently dream of being strangled by a wedding dress or eaten alive by bugs. I was in therapy for a long time, but nothing I did seemed to diminish the anger that I felt. Years have passed now, and I'm back in my old hometown. It wasn't hard finding Kyle again. It was actually easier than finding Sarah. She had taken some time to track down. She hadn't been especially happy to see me, especially after she learned how I wanted to play one last game of Truth or Dare. Kyle, however, was still in that same old house. When I knocked on the door, he actually let me inside, not recognizing me after all these years. All he saw was some poor young woman whose car had been broken down outside his door. While the years had been good to me, they had not been so good to Kyle. I'd gotten taller and my fat had been turned into muscle. He was prematurely balding and a beer belly was starting to form, and this worried me slightly. The box I had brought for him might not be big enough.